Alright, welcome back to Keep It Real Boxing. This is Cypherbox with another prediction video. This coming Saturday we have George Groves versus Eubank Jr for the IBO and WBA Super Middleweight Championship of the World in the semi-final of the World Boxing Series. You know, this is one I've been looking forward to for some time now. In my opinion, the guy who wins this fight, the fighter who wins this fight, is the favourite for the tournament to go on and win the tournament. I know we got Callum Smith in the other semi-final, which means we could be looking at an all-British World Boxing Super Series final for the super middleweight division. Very excited about this. You know, great fight, great matchup in my opinion. Okay, so let's get into this. Alright, so George Groves, 5'11.5" tall, 72-inch reach. You got Eubank with who's 5'11" tall with a 72.5" reach. So there's not much difference in terms of reach and height. George Groves is obviously the more natural super middleweight. He's, you know, compared to Chris Eubank Jr, who has jumped up from 160 pounds middleweight up to super middleweight. So in terms of natural size as a super middleweight, we'll probably have to go to George Groves. Now, don't forget, Eubank's been talking a lot recently, stating that, you know, he's sparred with George Groves on many occasions, and he's saying the size and all that sort of stuff that George Groves is kind of hoping and banking on making a massive difference in the fight won't be an issue at all. He says, I've sparred him many times. He goes, it's never been an issue in sparring, so it's never going to be an issue in the ring on fight night, in his opinion. Now, as always, I always review, you know, the most recent fights for any fighters that I'm doing prediction videos on. So I try and do 2 to 3 fights, which I think is a good level of fights to review when making a prediction. So with Chris Eubank Jr. took his last 2 fights against Yildirim and Arthur Abraham, and George Groves, it was Jamie Cox and Chudinov. And right off the bat, you know, one of the things I noticed when I looked at George Groves, you know, those couple of performances from George Groves, is I feel George Groves is more acceptable to taking punches from his opponent when things are up close and personal. So when he's fighting on the inside, when he's pushed up against the ropes and the pressure's applied to him and he's forced up back onto the ropes. Don't get me wrong, I know with George in those situations, he does get off good shots himself. He lands some good clean scoring punches, some hard punches, but he also leaves himself wide open as well for attack. You go back and look at the Jamie Cox fight, how much success Jamie Cox had pushing George Groves back and then teeing off on him. And then even if you look at a Chudinov fight, you know, Groves spent a lot of time again with his back on the ropes, with Chudinov putting a lot of pressure on him, landing a lot of punches. You know, it was, you know, George Groves had his, like I said, he had his success when he was in those situations, but he had to take a lot of punishment himself, which I don't think he's going to want to do that against Eubank Jr. come fight night, in my opinion. And I'll give you my reasons why. I believe that Chris Eubank Jr. is most effective from mid-range to close range. I think he's at his most dangerous when he's fighting from mid-range to close range, rather than, and not that I'm saying that he can't fight from long range and fight from range and keep a distance, etc. But I think he's more effective and more dangerous in those situations. His hand speed, his combination, his variety of punches, those vicious uppercuts he likes to throw. We saw those against Arthur Abraham, you know, and the speed that all comes with, you know, could be quite dangerous and risky for George Groves. Don't get me wrong, Eubank has his flaws too when he's fighting on the inside. He can become a little bit, I suppose the word I'm looking for is overzealous. Now, you've seen sometimes where he goes down really low and then he comes back up with an uppercut and throws everything into him. Sometimes even with the hook, you know, and when he does that, he leaves his jaw up in the air, which George Groves will probably need to look at and think about, well, when I'm in those situations, when I'm under that kind of pressure, what can I do to take advantage of the situation? And that is when he throws those sort of punches, and you know those, you've got to be able to read those sort of punches coming. And when you see them coming, which shouldn't be difficult for George Groves, is that he needs to think, right, I need to move out the way, and then come back with a beautiful counter. Because George Groves he's a very good counter puncher. I don't think, I'm not going to deny that. And he will need to use his skills and his experience to kind of take advantage of those situations as well. So when Eubank does get overly confident and he thinks, right, I've got this guy and now I'm just going to really put on a show and start putting in those hard punches, like that deep upper coming up from the bottom with that deep uppercut right to the top and leaving his chin out there, George Groves needs to know when to time that perfectly so he can take advantage of it and land, a clean shot on that jaw that Eubank likes to leave out there in the open on occasions. Personally, I think George Groves is more effective when he's fighting from range. Now, you'll notice with George Groves, whenever the first 2-3 rounds, he fights very cagey. That's his style in general, to be honest with you. Although that kind of calms down as the fight goes on, he is a very cagey fighter in terms of his style. But I think George Groves needs to use his jab a lot. He needs to keep Eubank at distance. I think he's more effective from range, no doubt about it. If you go and watch fights against Chudinov and Jamie Cox, I think, even when he's countering from range, so when he's, patiently waiting for his opponent to throw that punch, he moves out of the way and he comes back with a nice long counter. That's when he's at his best. Even throwing hooks from range, combinations and variety of punches from range, he's definitely more of a fighter who's better from being a little further back, keeping his opponent at bay, and he's more accurate from range as well, in my opinion. So I think he doesn't want to get on the inside or get himself pushed up against a rope. I can't say that's going to definitely not happen. End of the day, we've got to give Eubank Jr. his credit. He is a good fighter and he will pressure and move Groves back, of course. But George Groves got to control the centre of the ring, in my opinion, and he's got to keep Eubank Jr. at range. 1-2, 1-2-3 combinations, keep moving using that footwork. He does have good footwork as well. He's got good speed himself. He's good hand speed. Let's talk about that a little bit as well, because if I had to choose, I would say Eubank has the hand speed, and I think he has the quicker hand. I'm not saying that George Groves is slow, and I think George Groves, I don't know who has the power out of them two. You probably have to give it to George Groves, because in my opinion, George Groves, obviously he's a natural super middleweight. He's the bigger guy. When you look at their fights as well, I think George Groves might just edge it on the power as well. But like I said, we won't know that till fight night, if I'm honest with you. But definitely, I think George Groves definitely needs to keep it at range. Smart boxing. Get Eubank to commit. We know Eubank, he likes to come in and put on a show, and he always talks about putting on exciting fights. So he will not want to back off. He'll probably want to come forward and put it on George Groves and get him up against the ropes and get him in those close quarter situations. Where they're fighting on the inside and stuff like that. George Groves can't let that happen. He's got to control the centre of the ring and box smart and keep Eubank at a distance and just box his head off. Is basically what I'm going to say from George Groves' point of view. Now, as for Chris Eubank Jr. Now, Eubank, he can fight from distance. We saw elements of that against Yildirim. But like I said, I think he's more effective and more dangerous from mid to close range. I think he enjoys fighting from there as well. I think he likes it when it's up close and personal. He has good defensive, evasive skills, so ducking and rolling with the punches, getting low, getting out of the way. I think he's probably a little bit better at that sort of stuff, especially from range and from the inside position. I think he's probably better than George Groves in that, because yes, Eubank does get hit in those situations, but I think he's less acceptable than George Groves, if that makes sense. He'll want to take control of the centre of the ring, but then start pushing George back, start pushing George Groves back onto the ropes, into the corners. Make it very uncomfortable for George Groves. Take him where he probably doesn't want to go, in a sense. Like, for me, I feel like when George Groves is up against the ropes, in the corners, that sort of pressure is being applied to him. It's close range. I don't think he particularly enjoys it. I think he likes to be at a distance. When I saw him against Jamie Cox and Chudinov, it was a rough time for him in there. Even Carl Froch was commentating for the Chudinov fight, and even he was saying, George needs to, get off the ropes and, put a bit of distance between him and Chudinov, and it, doesn't look great. he doesn't look great in those situations, in my opinion. Now let's go back to Eubank Jr. a little bit, talk about his defensive skills. Now, although I've praised him a lot, that he's able to roll with the punches, get his opponents to commit and get him to miss, come back with counters, all that sort of stuff. The movement around the ring when he wants to fight from range, etc., and stuff like that. Great stuff. There is a flaw there as well when it comes to his defensive capabilities. When I said when he gets overexcited, gets overconfident, and he starts throwing those wild punches, I saw it against Arthur Abraham, and there's times where he throws this like lazy jab sometimes, or this lazy left hook out there. He won't be able to, he can't afford to do that against George Groves. He can't afford to be that cocky against George Groves, because if he does that against George Groves is going to move out of the way. And like I said, George Groves is a very good counter puncher. He's going to come back with a beautiful counter. He needs to be careful that he doesn't have moments like that where he shows that lazy jab or that lazy left hook. You'll see, go watch the fight sometime, go watch any of his fights, you'll see he'll throw this long lazy hook or left jab out, and he cannot afford to do that against George Groves, in my opinion, because George will just simply move out of the way and come back with a counter. At the same time, talking about counter punching, Eubank Jr., he's a very good counter puncher himself. I feel these guys, both these guys really balance each other out. I think this is what makes it such an intriguing fight. They do balance each other out. They do a lot of similar things, and then on those similar things, they slightly edge each other. So, for example, like I said, I think, Eubank's got better hand speed than George Groves. I think George Groves edges Eubank maybe when it comes to power as well. Like I said, we'll have to wait till fight night to see that. Being that he's the more natural super middleweight, I'm not saying that Eubank doesn't have power. I just think George Groves probably has a little bit more. They both have good ring intelligence, good footwork, can both fight from range. When it comes from the inside game, I think, again, Eubank just edges George Groves, because I think George Groves is more acceptable to punches when he's on the inside than Eubank. But then Eubank has his weaknesses in that position as well, where he gets overconfident and starts throwing wild haymakers and stuff like that, and leaves his chin out on the air. So there's a lot of things that where these guys kind of balance each other off, and it makes for a great fight. I'm really excited. I don't really care which one wins, because either way, we're gonna have a Brit in the final of the World Boxing Super Series, and potentially, we're gonna have a unified champion there as well, and then go on to pick up, go on to win the tournament, which is great, and pick up that Ali trophy. Now, I've been saying for months now, that this fight is a close 50-50 fight. But I've promised myself on this one. Most times I don't. If I can't pick, I can't pick. But I promised myself on this one, I am gonna try and pick a winner. And I'm gonna say this to you now. I still believe it's a 50-50 fight, but I am gonna pick a winner, or who I think might just win it. And I think the person who's just gonna probably edge it, and I mean the very slight edge. I'm giving this person, this fighter, the very slightest of edges here over the other guy. I'm gonna go with Chris Eubank Jr. I just think he's the more fresher fighter. He hasn't been in as many wars or tough fights as George Groves. I think because of that freshness, I think he'll overcome George Groves on the night. He's very confident. I don't think nerves are going to be a problem with him, where I think sometimes with George Groves, if you go back and watch the Chudinov fight, I think nerves do get to him sometimes a little bit, especially in the earlier rounds. If you go back and look at that fight, like I said, he fought very cagey, and he was like that throughout the fight, and it calmed down as the fight went on, even against Jamie Cox. But I just feel, I think Eubank's just going to edge it on that reason alone. I'm honest, it's really tough. I can't really pick between these two guys at the moment, because at the same time, even though I'm saying that in my head right now, I'm going to say it out loud, at the same time, it could be the case that George Groves' experience kind of trumps Eubank's lack of experience. If the fight goes deep into the late rounds, George Groves is going to have more experience, dealing with that situation. When you get tired, where your arms are starting to get tired, you're starting to become a little bit fatigued. how to box smart in those situations, and Eubank probably hasn't got enough experience with that. So at the same time, even though I've picked Eubank Jr. and said that it's because he's the fresher guy and he hasn't been in as many wars, etc. and stuff like that, at the same time, that could be his downfall as well, because George Groves' experience could end up trumping, like I said, Eubank's lack of experience. But I'm going to go with Eubank, but I would not be surprised at all if George Groves wins the fight. So for me, it's still a 50-50, but I'm kind of forcing myself to pick someone here, and I'm going to pick Eubank Jr. I mean, the build-up for this fight has been tremendous. We saw the press conference between the two of them, playing their old mind games, trying to get inside each other's head. It's the first time I've seen Eubank be so vocal in the way he was, so he clearly sees Groves as a serious threat, no matter what he says. I don't know if you go into the World Boxing Super Series YouTube channel, you can see the build-up, like the behind-the-scenes sort of stuff. Both of these guys giving it the big talk, as they always do, where they're both saying that they're going to knock each other out. They're both predicting, I think, the same sort of knockout at the same stage of the fight, which is both of them, I think, are saying between 6th and the 8th round they're going to knock each other out. So there's a lot of talk there, don't get me wrong. But sometimes, you know what, I don't know if anyone else feels like this when you look at George Groves. If you go back to the fights against Carl Froch, he was super confident in that first fight, in the build-up to that fight. Even before that fight, he was always a very confident fighter. We know that. Kind of like very much Eubank Jr, to be honest with you. Very much like Eubank Jr. He lost that first fight, felt it was unfair the way it was stopped, etc. and stuff, whatever. Had the next fight, again, in the build-up for the second fight, again, super confident, very much like Eubank Jr. Then got knocked out clean cold, in that fight, and went on. Didn't hear much of the mouth from him from that point on. Obviously was disappointed with the fact that he lost to Carl Froch in the second fight, that knockout. Fought Badu Jack, and again, you know what? I just get this feeling, I don't know if anyone else feels the same way. I don't think George Groves he doesn't come off as confident as he used to be. And don't get me wrong, I know a knockout, like a vicious knockout against, against Carl Froch in that second fight would do that to a fighter. But whereas before, what I'm trying to say is, when he used to talk, you believe his confidence. Whether you believed he would win or not doesn't matter, but you believed his confidence. And ever since then, whenever I see him talk, I always think, like, do you really believe in yourself that much, or are you just doing it for show? Because I don't feel like he comes off as, basically what I'm trying to say, he doesn't come off as confident as he used to. And like I said before, the Carl Froch fights, he was very much like Eubank Jr. in my opinion. Whether it's maturity and those fights that he lost have humbled him a little bit, I don't know what it is. But sometimes I don't necessarily believe, George Groves is as confident as he makes himself out to be. I look at his interview and I think, you're not convincing me. Chris Eubank Jr. does feel, does convince you. But like I said, look, it's a great fight. Like that matters. I was just throwing that one out there. I'd love to hear your opinion on it, on George Groves. Do you think he's as confident as he makes out to be? But look, great fight. Like I said, I've been saying, I still say it now, it's still a 50-50 fight. I've forced myself to pick a winner, and I'm going to go with Chris Eubank Jr. on this one. Just going to give him the edge. Okay, so that's all I got for you on this one. Let me know what you think of this fight and how it's going to go. As always, guys, like, share and subscribe. Until next time, this is Cyphbox reminding you to keep it real.